My name is Anna Crawford, and this is the story of how my famous cousin, Julia, tried to steal my baby and how I got him back. Julia was the golden child everyone adored, the celebrity everyone admired. She was rich and famous and thought her name and money could buy her anything, even my son. 3 years ago, I believed I was making the most selfless choice a woman could make. Instead, I walked straight into a trap. And if I hadn't been documenting every word, every promise, every threat, my baby would be in her arms right now, calling her mama, while I disappeared into the footnotes of her perfect life. Tonight, I sit in my little boy's nursery, watching him dream peacefully, knowing that if I hadn't kept those records, he'd be sleeping in her mansion as her child, and the world would believe she was the victim, not me. So here's the truth. Here's how the perfect family darling tried to steal my child, and how I turned her own lies into the weapon that destroyed her. Before I tell you how Julia's fame crumbled overnight, drop a comment and let me know if you have ever been betrayed by a family member you loved so much, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself. In 2019, I was 38, single, and honestly, pretty content with my life. I had a solid job as a medical records administrator at Providence General in Alabama. Nothing glamorous, but I was good with details, good with systems, and good with keeping things organized. My little apartment was cozy, my savings account was growing, and I had this quiet life that felt safe. Then my cousin Julia called. Now, Julia and I had grown up together, but our lives had gone in completely different directions. While I was filing medical charts, she was selling out arenas. Julia Manning, maybe you've heard of her? The country singer with the voice of an angel and the smile that launched 1,000 magazine covers? Yeah, that's my cousin. We'd always been close, despite the fame. She never made me feel less than, never acted like her success changed things between us. When she married Eric, this successful music producer, I was genuinely happy for her. They seemed perfect together, this power couple living this fairy tale life. So when she called me that October evening, crying, I dropped everything. Anna, she sobbed through the phone. I don't know who else to ask. They'd been trying for years to have a baby. Multiple miscarriages, failed IVF treatments, hope after hope crushed. The doctors had finally told them that Julia's cervix was too damaged from a childhood accident. She'd never be able to carry a pregnancy to term. We've looked into adoption, she said, but the waiting lists are so long, and with my career, agencies worry about the lifestyle, the travel, the publicity. I listened, my heart breaking for her. I could hear Eric in the background, his voice gentle as he tried to comfort her. There's something I need to ask you, Julia continued. And please, just say no if it's too much. But would you consider being our surrogate? The request hit me like a freight train. Surrogacy, carrying their baby. I know it's huge, she rushed on. I know it's asking everything. But Anna, you're the only person I trust. Your family. You're healthy. And you understand what family means. I sat there in my quiet apartment, phone pressed to my ear, and felt this overwhelming surge of purpose, I guess. Here was my chance to do something that really mattered. To help the person who'd always been like a sister to me have the family she'd dreamed of. Let me think about it, I said. But honestly, I already knew my answer. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Eric's lawyer's office, looking at surrogacy contracts. Traditional surrogacy, they explained, my egg, Eric's sperm, since Julia's eggs weren't viable. The baby would be genetically mine, but legally there's once the adoption was finalized after birth. I remember reading through those papers, all that legal language about compensation, $50,000, medical care, decision-making rights. It felt so clinical, so removed from the emotional reality of what we were doing. Are you sure about this? Eric asked me. He seemed nervous, almost guilty. It's a lot to ask. I'm sure, I said, and I meant it. Julia squeezed my hand. You don't know what this means to us. The procedure was successful on the second try. By January 2020, I was pregnant. Those 9 months were magical, honestly. Julia came to every appointment she could. She'd put her hands on my belly and sing to the baby, little lullabies she was writing just for him. Eric would FaceTime from tour locations, asking about kicks and cravings. They treated me like I was carrying the most precious thing in the world, which I suppose I was. I felt so included, so valued. Julia would call just to check on me, not even about the baby stuff, just to ask how I was sleeping, if I needed anything, how work was going. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. Nathan was born on September 15th, 2020, after 18 hours of labor. Julia and Eric were in the delivery room, and when the doctor placed him in Julia's arms first, I felt nothing but joy watching her face light up. "He's perfect," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Anna, look what you gave us." But even in that moment, something felt off. The nurses kept looking at me strangely. The paperwork they brought me to sign seemed different from what we'd discussed. Just some standard post-birth documentation, Eric assured me when I hesitated. Establishing legal custody, medical decisions, that sort of thing. I signed. Of course I signed. These were my family members. I trusted them completely. The next few weeks were a blur. I was recovering from delivery, going back to work, trying to adjust to my post-pregnancy body and emotions. Julia and Eric sent constant updates, photos, videos, little voice messages from Nathan. Well, Eric doing a baby voice, but still. I was happy. Tired, emotionally drained, but happy. I'd done this incredible thing for people I loved. 3 months later, I got a call from my health insurance company. "Ms. Crawford, we're showing some discrepancies in your maternity claims. Can you verify the father listed on Nathan Manning's birth certificate?" My blood went cold. "I'm sorry, what?" "The birth certificate lists Eric Manning as the father, but our records show you as the biological mother. For insurance purposes, we need to clarify the relationship." I hung up and immediately called the hospital's records department. "Hi, this is Anna Crawford. I delivered a baby there in September. Nathan Manning? I need a copy of the birth certificate." When that document came in the mail 2 days later, my world collapsed. Mother, Julia Catherine Manning. Father, Eric James Manning. Not surrogate mother. Not biological mother with intended parents listed. Just nothing. Like I'd never existed. I called Julia immediately. "Oh, Anna." Her voice was bright, cheerful. "How are you doing? Nathan's rolling over now. Can you believe it?" "Julia," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "I just got Nathan's birth certificate." Silence. "There must be some mistake," she finally said, but her tone had changed completely. Cooler, more careful. "What kind of mistake puts your name as the birth mother when you weren't even pregnant?" "Anna, listen. You forged documents." The words came out flat, emotionless. "You put your name on my son's birth certificate. He's not your son." Julia's voice was sharp now. "We had an agreement. You were a surrogate. The baby was always meant to be ours. But I'm his biological mother, Julia. This isn't legal adoption paperwork. This is fraud." "You're being dramatic. Eric's lawyers handled everything properly. You signed the forms." But I hadn't signed forms putting her name as the birth mother. I'd signed adoption papers that were supposed to be processed legally with proper court approval and waiting periods. "I want to see Nathan," I said. "That's not a good idea right now. You're clearly emotional and—" "I want to see my son. Anna." Julia's voice dropped to that tone she used to use when we were kids, and she was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. "Don't make this ugly. You did a beautiful thing. Don't ruin it now." The line went dead. I sat in my apartment, staring at that forged birth certificate, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. These people I trusted, my own family, had stolen my child and were telling me I was crazy for being upset about it. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathan's tiny face, wondered if he was sleeping peacefully, wondered if he'd ever know who I really was. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Unfortunately, Ms. Crawford, this type of case is extremely difficult to prove, Attorney Margaret Walsh told me during our consultation, especially when the other party has significant financial resources and legal representation. But it's fraud, I insisted. The birth certificate is falsified. Yes, but you did sign surrogate agreements. Their lawyers will argue that you understood the arrangement and that any documentary irregularities are clerical errors, not intentional fraud. So I have no recourse. I didn't say that, but you need to understand what you're up against. Julia Manning has a spotless public reputation, significant wealth, and top-tier legal representation. Challenging her will be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally brutal. The retainer fee alone would drain my savings account. I called Child Protective Services. The caseworker listened politely, took notes, but explained that without evidence of immediate danger to the child, they couldn't intervene in what appeared to be a civil custody dispute. I tried reaching out to Eric directly. His assistant informed me that Mr. Manning couldn't take my call, but they'd be happy to relay a message. I even tried showing up at Julia's house, the massive estate in Belmead that I'd visited so many times over the years. The security guard at the gate knew me, looked genuinely confused when he told me I wasn't on the approved visitor list. But Mr. Manning left specific instructions, he said apologetically. I'm sorry, Ms. Crawford. Every door was closing. Every avenue was blocked. Meanwhile, Julia's career was exploding. Her new album, Blessed, debuted at #1. The lead single, Miracle Boy, was supposedly inspired by Nathan's birth. She gave interviews about the joys of motherhood, about how becoming a parent had changed her perspective on everything. I never knew I could love something so much, she told Country Music Weekly. Nathan is our everything, like I didn't exist. I watched her on late-night talk shows, glowing as she talked about her miracle baby, accepting congratulations from hosts and audiences alike. America's sweetheart, living her perfect life. And I was invisible. The worst part of me started to doubt myself. Julia was so confident, so matter-of-fact about the whole situation. Their lawyers were so professional, so dismissive of my concerns. Maybe I was remembering things wrong. Maybe I had signed different papers than I thought. Maybe I really was just being emotional and dramatic, like Julia had said. But then I'd look at the pictures they occasionally sent, Nathan's first smile, his first tooth, his first Halloween costume. And I'd feel this ache in my chest that reminded me exactly who he was. My son. What Julia and Eric didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything from the very beginning. See, working in medical records teaches you certain habits. You keep copies. You date everything. You create paper trails without even thinking about it. It's just how your brain works after years of dealing with insurance companies and legal requirements. So I had copies of the original surrogacy contract drafts. I had text message threads going back 18 months. I had email exchanges about medical appointments, financial arrangements, legal procedures. I had recordings of phone calls, because yes, I live in a one-party consent state and I record important conversations as a matter of course. Most importantly, I had a recording of the conversation where Julia and Eric's lawyer first explained the surrogacy process to me. And in that recording, he clearly stated that as the biological mother, my parental rights would need to be terminated through a separate legal process after Nathan's birth. That process never happened, but I needed more than documentation. I needed to understand exactly how they'd pulled this off and why they thought they could get away with it. So I started digging. Julia's rise to fame had been meteoric, but it hadn't been without controversy. There were rumors about her early career, whispers about things she'd done to get ahead. I started following entertainment industry blogs, forums where session musicians and backup singers shared stories. And then I found Sarah. Sarah had been Julia's backup singer from 2015 to 2017. She'd left suddenly, and when I tracked her down through mutual connections, she was hesitant to talk at first. I signed an NDA, she said when I called. I can't discuss my time working with Julia. I'm not a reporter, I told her. I'm her cousin, and I need to understand who she really is. Something in my voice must have convinced her to meet me for coffee. Julia isn't who people think she is, Sarah said quietly, glancing around the cafe like someone might be listening. The sweet, wholesome image. It's completely manufactured. She told me about songs Julia had stolen credit for, about writers who'd been forced to sign away their royalties for a chance to work with her, about the way Julia systematically destroyed anyone who crossed her. She collects information about people, Sarah explained. Personal stuff, embarrassing stuff, and she uses it when she needs to. What kind of information? Anything that could damage someone's reputation or livelihood. Affairs, financial problems, family secrets. She's got files on everyone who works with her. How do you know this? Sarah looked uncomfortable, because I helped her compile some of them, before I realized what I was doing. This was the key. Julia wasn't just a talented singer who'd made a mistake with my surrogacy. She was someone who systematically manipulated and controlled people using their vulnerabilities against them. There's something else, Sarah said, about Eric. Eric, it turned out, had a gambling problem. A serious one. Despite their wealth, their finances were constantly precarious because he'd blow through hundreds of thousands at private poker games and offshore betting sites. Julia covers for him, but she's furious about it. I heard them fighting about it all the time when I was working there. Does anyone else know? His business partner's suspect, but Julia's worked really hard to keep it quiet. If it got out, it could ruin his reputation in the industry. Nobody wants to work with a producer who might gamble away their album budget. I thanked Sarah and left that meeting with my mind racing. Julia had built her entire career on manipulation and control. She was used to making problems disappear, to rewriting history to suit her needs. Taking my baby wasn't an emotional decision. It was just another Tuesday for her. But everyone has vulnerabilities. Even Julia. Over the next several months, I became a different person. I joined online forums for entertainment industry workers, quietly gathering information. I learned about record label politics, about how reputations were built and destroyed in Nashville. I also learned about Eric's gambling, not just from Sarah, but from dealers at underground games, from other musicians who'd heard the rumors. The problem was worse than Sarah had known. Eric owed money to some very unforgiving people, and Julia had been quietly selling assets to cover his debts, real estate, jewelry, even some of her music catalog rights. But the most interesting thing I discovered was that Julia's current record deal was up for renewal. Her label was negotiating a massive contract that would set her up for life, but only if her image remained spotless. Any scandal, any controversy, any threat to her wholesome brand could kill the deal entirely. That's when I realized I didn't need to just prove that she'd stolen my baby. I needed to make the cost of keeping him higher than the cost of giving him back. My plan required patience, precision, and absolutely perfect timing. First, I quietly hired a new attorney, not someone in Nashville where Julia's influence reached, but a specialist in parental rights law from Atlanta. Margaret Chin had handled dozens of surrogacy disputes and had never lost a case involving forged documents. "What you have here is criminal fraud," she told me after reviewing my evidence. Not just civil fraud, criminal. The falsified birth certificate, the forged adoption papers. If we can prove intent, Julia and Eric could face felony charges. "I don't want them to go to prison," I said. "I just want my son back." "That's admirable, but you need to understand the leverage you have. They've committed serious crimes. That gives us significant negotiating power." Margaret began building our case methodically. Expert witnesses who could testify about document forgery. Medical experts who could explain the impossibility of Julia having given birth. Legal experts who could speak to the requirements for legitimate surrogacy arrangements. But I knew a legal case alone wouldn't be enough. Julia had resources to drag things out for years, and I couldn't afford that kind of fight. I needed to hit her where it would hurt most, her career. So I started reaching out to journalists, not mainstream entertainment reporters who might be influenced by Julia's publicity team, but investigative journalists who specialized in corruption and fraud stories. The first 3 I contacted weren't interested. Celebrity surrogacy disputes weren't their beat, and Julia's reputation was too solid to make them think there was a real story there. But the 4th journalist I found was different. Rebecca Martinez worked for an independent media company that focused on exposing corruption in the entertainment industry. She'd broken stories about financial fraud in record labels, about systematic abuse by producers and managers. "Send me everything you have," she said after our initial conversation. Over the next month, I provided Rebecca with documents, recordings, contact information for witnesses. She verified everything independently, tracked down additional sources, built a comprehensive picture of Julia and Eric's fraud. But she also helped me understand something crucial about timing. "If we publish this story now," Rebecca explained, "Julia's team will go into crisis management mode. They'll deny everything, attack your credibility, tie this up in legal challenges for years. You need to wait for the right moment when they can't afford the distraction of a scandal." That moment was coming. Julia's record label had scheduled a major press event for February, a formal announcement of her new contract and a celebration of her career achievements. It was going to be the biggest moment of her professional life. 2 weeks before that event, I made my move. I contacted Eric directly through a mutual acquaintance, someone he couldn't ignore or block. I requested a private meeting. We met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant downtown, during a Tuesday lunch when it wouldn't be crowded. Eric looked terrible, older than his 42 years, with the hollow-eyed look of someone carrying too much stress. "Anna," he said, sitting across from me, "you look good. I want Nathan back." He sighed. "We've been over this. The surrogacy agreement was fraudulent." I placed a folder on the table between us. "Those are copies of the original documents we all signed, the ones where your lawyer clearly explained that my parental rights would need to be legally terminated after Nathan's birth. That process never happened." Eric's face paled as he flipped through the papers. "Instead," I continued, "you forged a birth certificate listing Julia as Nathan's biological mother. That's a felony, Eric. Look, Anna, I also have documentation of your gambling debts." I slid another folder across the table. Roughly $2.3 million owed to some very interesting people. People who don't typically accept payment plans. Eric's hands were shaking now. "Here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "You're going to convince Julia to return Nathan to me voluntarily. You're going to publicly acknowledge that there were irregularities in the surrogacy documentation that need to be corrected. And you're going to do it before her contract signing next week. And if we don't, then on the day of Julia's big celebration, every major entertainment outlet will receive a comprehensive report detailing your fraud, your gambling addiction, and the criminal charges you're both facing. Your wife's new contract will evaporate, and you'll both be more focused on avoiding prison than raising my son." Eric stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You've changed," he said. "No," I replied. "I just stopped letting you underestimate me." Eric tried to convince Julia to negotiate. I know because he called me that evening, desperate and exhausted. "She won't listen," he said. "She thinks you're bluffing. She says you don't have the guts to go through with it. She's wrong. Anna, please. Isn't there some other way we can work this out? Money? We could set up a trust fund for you. Make sure you're taken care of." "I don't want your money, Eric. I want my son. But he's been with us for over 2 years now. He doesn't even know you. Wouldn't it be traumatic to?" "Don't." My voice was ice cold. "Don't you dare use Nathan's well-being as an excuse for what you've done." Julia called me herself the next day. "You always were jealous," she said without any preamble. Even when we were kids, you couldn't stand that people paid attention to me instead of you. This isn't about jealousy, Julia. It's about fraud. Nobody will believe you. I'm America's sweetheart, remember? You're just a bitter woman who can't accept that she was paid to provide a service. We'll see. I've built an entire career on my reputation. Do you really think anyone will choose your word over mine? I don't need them to choose my word, I said. I have evidence. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. What do you want? She finally asked. Nathan. Full custody, and a public acknowledgement that the surrogacy documentation was handled incorrectly. Absolutely not. Then we'll see you in court. And in the headlines. 3 days before the contract signing, Julia's legal team reached out to Margaret. They wanted to discuss a settlement. The meeting was tense. Julia sat rigid in her chair, her usual warmth replaced by barely controlled fury. Eric looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Our clients are willing to discuss a modification of the custody arrangement, their lead attorney began. There is no custody arrangement, Margaret replied firmly. Your clients have been in illegal possession of Ms. Crawford's biological child for over 2 years. That's not how we see it. Then perhaps you'd like to explain your interpretation to a judge and the media. The negotiations took 6 hours. Julia's team tried everything, offering me money, threatening to countersue for breach of contract, claiming that Nathan's removal from the only home he'd known would constitute child abuse. But they had no leverage and they knew it. Finally, Julia herself spoke up. What guarantees do we have that you won't go to the press anyway, even if we agree to your terms? You have my word, I said. Your word. She laughed bitterly. After everything you've put us through? Unlike you, Julia, I keep my promises. In the end, we reached an agreement. Full custody of Nathan would revert to me immediately. Julia and Eric would publicly acknowledge that there had been administrative irregularities in the surrogacy documentation that required correction. They would not contest my custody or pursue any future legal action. In exchange, I would not pursue criminal charges, and I would not provide information to journalists about the case. The paperwork was signed at 4 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. At 6 p.m., I walked into Julia's house, the same house where I'd been turned away by security just months before, and carried my son home. Nathan was confused, of course. He didn't understand why this stranger was taking him away from the people he'd always known as his parents. He cried for Julia, reached for Eric, asked where he was going in that heartbreaking way that only a toddler can. That night was the hardest of my life, holding my own child while he sobbed for someone else, knowing that I was doing the right thing while watching him suffer for it. But children are resilient, more resilient than adults sometimes. Within weeks, Nathan had adjusted to his new routine. He started calling me Anna instead of Mama at first, but gradually that changed. He began smiling when he saw me, laughing at my silly faces, reaching for me when he was tired or scared. And slowly, I began to see myself in him. Not just physically, though he had my eyes, my stubborn chin, but in his personality, his curiosity about how things worked, his careful way of watching people before deciding whether to trust them. My son. Finally, truly my son. Julia's contract signing went ahead as scheduled. She performed beautifully, smiled for the cameras, graciously accepted congratulations on her new deal. But the entertainment industry is a small world, and word had gotten around about the administrative irregularities with her surrogacy arrangement. There were whispers, questions that her publicity team deflected with vague statements about privacy and family matters. The new album that Julia had planned, the one that was supposed to capitalize on her image as a devoted mother, was quietly shelved. Her label decided to focus on her existing catalog instead. Eric's gambling debts eventually caught up with him. Without access to Julia's full earning potential, he couldn't keep up with the payments. He was forced into a very public bankruptcy that exposed the full extent of his addiction. Their marriage ended 6 months later. Julia's career survived, but it never fully recovered. The whispers never quite went away. Her carefully crafted image had hairline cracks that grew wider over time. She released one more album 2 years later. It was critically acclaimed, but commercially unsuccessful. The title track, What I Lost, was widely interpreted as being about Nathan. She never tried to contact us. As for me, my quiet life isn't quite so quiet anymore. Nathan is 4 now, bright and energetic and completely mine. We live in a house with a backyard where he can play, in a neighborhood where everyone knows his story. Not the tabloid version, but the real one. I kept my job at Providence General, but I also started doing consulting work for other women dealing with surrogacy disputes. There are more of us than you might think, women who trusted family members or friends, only to discover that trust had been weaponized against us. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm stronger now, more confident. I trust my instincts in ways I never did before. When someone tries to dismiss my concerns or make me doubt my own perceptions, I remember sitting in that conference room, watching Julia's lawyers realize they had no power over me. I remember the look on Julia's face when she understood that I wasn't the pushover she'd counted on. People ask me sometimes if I regret any of it, if I wish I'd handled things differently, been less confrontational, found a way to work things out privately. But when I watched Nathan sleep in his own bed, in his own room, surrounded by toys that I bought him and books that I read to him, I know I did exactly what any mother would do. I protected my child. The legal documents that Julia and Eric forged still exist somewhere in official files. The birth certificate that lists her as Nathan's mother is still technically on record, though it's been superseded by corrected documentation. Sometimes I think about those papers, evidence of the lengths that desperate people will go to get what they want, regardless of who they hurt in the process. But mostly, I don't think about Julia and Eric at all anymore. I think about Nathan's laugh when I chase him around the playground. I think about the way he holds my hand when we're walking somewhere new. I think about the trust in his eyes when he looks at me. Real trust, earned trust, the kind that can't be forged or stolen. Julia taught me something valuable, though she probably doesn't realize it. She taught me that family isn't about blood or legal documents or who has the most money for lawyers. Family is about showing up day after day, even when it's hard. Even when the person you love doesn't understand why you're fighting for them. Even when the whole world seems lined up against you. Family is about keeping promises, even when it costs you everything. And family is about knowing, without any doubt, that some things are worth fighting for, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise. Nathan is sleeping peacefully in the next room, and tomorrow we'll wake up together in our own home, and I'll make him breakfast and read him stories and watch him discover something new about the world. It's a quiet life, a simple life, but it's ours, and that makes it perfect. If you enjoyed this story, then take a few seconds to like and share this story with your family and friends. Also subscribe for more relatable and entertaining stories.